Well, we're gonna start with watching a film, and so that will be really nice just to sort of see the work. We've got Sumit Sarkar here. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. This is going to be an absolute treat because what we've got an artist who works both with digital and with analog. So you've got this like sort of like dual left and right brain thing going on, haven't you? Well, so what's really exciting is we get to see how the sort of like you combine the digital with the sort of like, you know, sort of the hand-based work. And so it's going to be really exciting learning all this. Plus we also get demo, and I expect you all to know everything when you leave this space because there's only sort of, well, there's a few of us, so we're going to be learning quite a lot here. So over to you, let's watch the video and we'll take it out to sort of like a little discussion, conversation, because there's only a few of us here, so we can make it nice and informal.
Okay, we'll start with the video.
Wasn't that amazing? That's so inspiring.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll talk about that piece a bit later. So hi everyone, my name's Sumit Sarkar. I'm a painter and sculptor. I'm going to be talking for about an hour about my work and the sort of relationship between painting and sculpture, digital and traditional, analog if you will, and more recently figurative to abstract work. And I guess I should say that it's not a linear journey. It goes forward and folds back on itself and contradicts itself and then merges together. I sort of move from one art form to another, but I always keep hold of what I've done before. So I'm going to go quite far back. One of the things is I think when I was a kid and when I was at school and college, it felt like there were three different strands which have eventually sort of come together. But there was the proper fine art stuff, so I was like really interested. I was looking at all the traditional fine artists and all of that. But I also was really into comics and cartoons and graffiti and skateboard design and all of that stuff. So that was happening, but I kind of kept that secret, private to the school, fine art, proper stuff. But then also I was also really interested in digital artwork. And this goes back right to the 80s, and I remember on our second computer, we had a ZX Spectrum, then we had the Amstrad CPC 6128, you remember it?
Yes.
Brilliant. Me and my sister spent hours copying pages and pages of code from the back of the manual that came with it, and you were supposed to be able to make an art program. And I don't know if we got lines wrong, but it didn't really work very well. But it kind of worked, but it was very glitchy, but it was unusable. But basically, there was no mice back then. It was all cursor keys. And it was the most basic art program, which was like dropping a black pixel on a white background, and you would sort of move the cursor. And it was a pixel at a time. So that's where it started. And then a few years later, my parents got me an Amiga 500, and this program is Deluxe Paint 3, I think this one is. It started with 2, and this one blew my mind because at first it was, you can see there's like a couple of versions of each primary colour, and then importantly, like more than 10 shades of grey, which felt to me like the beginning of digital painting, because you could really think about shadows and light as if you were painting. And it was particularly useful if you were into like painting metal and robots, which I was and still am. Most of the work is sort of unsalvageable on discs and on computers that have been thrown away, but luckily my friend at school printed out some things on a dot matrix printer at school years ago, so a few have survived, but what you don't get is that even back then the digital quality of seeing it on a screen, you would have had like a really clean graphic, but this is like dot matrix, so it's all dotty, but it's kind of nice for what it is. That's the last of my work from being a kid that I will show. I'm fast forwarding a few years, but relatively not that many. So what I was doing in my fine art practice, if I can call it that, while I was at school, was very sort of traditional and maybe predictable, kind of quite teenage angsty kind of work. I was inspired by Francis Bacon and Edvard Munch, you know, that kind of quite self-obsessed kind of painterly artwork. And it kept me going for a while, but when I got to my foundation course, Camberwell College of Arts, I met this artist, Ryo Okamoto, who's still my favourite artist. And what he was doing was, at the time, it felt really revolutionary. So he was essentially doing cartoons on canvas, which I had never seen before, in 1996. And it was sort of melding Basquiat's work with manga. So he was doing his own stuff, but he was also like actually referencing pages from famous manga books and sort of painting them in a very Basquiat kind of way. But I felt that was very much his thing, and I was experimenting. It was sort of around, I think it was just before Sensation, but you're kind of looking at trying to find I was painting with mud and all kinds of, just experimenting. But I felt that was his thing. But then when I went to visit him, he'd gone to St Martin's and I came to Manchester to do my degree in fine art. And his work had like evolved a massive step. I'm talking about Ryo a lot, it's good. And it had become like quite painterly and like more mature and darker. And I remember on the sketch home, a sketch on the train on the way back home, I did this character. And yeah, so when I mentioned I had like these two, the three strands of my work, I used to have two sketchbooks. So I'd have my fine art sketchbook and then the comic cartoony one. And at this moment, they became one. And I had this sort of Krik character that was sort of, he came into the fine art book and he lost his superpowers and his muscles and he became this like flawed man-child demon with demons kind of thing. And I kind of felt like I could do my own take on it. Didn't feel like I was stepping on Ryo's toes, and we're still friends. And yeah, I think what I liked about it was I was able to use sort of cartoon iconography as a sort of a metaphor for kind of maybe darker things, or like I could sort of talk almost abstractly about what I wanted to say without it being too obvious, so kind of hiding behind icons and metaphors. But then also the primary colours of a cartoon and that simple style to counterbalance quite dark themes often. And yet a picture of loads of sketchbooks that I really felt like I found myself at that point. It was like I was just constantly drawing and just loads of ideas, and it felt like I was able to express for the first time sort of the ideas that I had about expressing what I wanted to about myself and my views on life and stuff like that. And then, so also while I was at university, I sort of made sure that my summer jobs and work experience was all around sort of graphic design companies. So this was the first time I'd used Photoshop, which again was another step up. And suddenly you went from the Amiga with its 20 odd colours to millions of colours, being able to work on different layers, really advanced tools, and being able to undo and all of that. So this was the first couple of digital paintings. And these are actually, again, I don't know if I've got the original files. These are photos of prints. And then there was the brave move to actually bring I'd already brought the comic stuff into the fine art work at university, sort of testing what my tutors would accept on a fine art painting course. But then I brought the digital work into university. So back in those days, I think I was mainly like sketching or painting and then scanning and then bringing it in to my computer. But as it's evolved, I actually now do all the sketching and most of the work purely digital. And again, similar themes as the work before. Much more of the same. Hundreds and hundreds of images. And then also, while I was at university, I did the chance sketch of a character that struck me as looking like the Hindu god Shiva, and it looked like a modern version of it, which inspired this idea of a new body of work, which would be sort of reimagining the Hindu pantheon as per my understanding of it, and to sort of reinvent it for a modern age was the idea. When I was a kid, I used to get these comic books from India that would tell the stories of the Hindu gods in comic book format, I loved them when I was a kid. So I was kind of quite familiar with a lot of the stories. But then I got really into it and bought a few mythology books, and there was like this wealth of stuff to have ideas for artwork for. So, for example, this image, Shiva famously has the third eye. And each story has like 100 or 1,000 different variations, but this version he was meditating on a mountain and his partner Parvati playfully covered his eyes, and because he is the universe, the whole world was consumed in darkness, and then he had to sort of have a third eye to issue light into the world. So an example of all these stories that I could get some ideas from. And also, while I was at university, these are still from work at university, all digital. One aspect of Hinduism is this concept of creation, preservation, destruction, and I had loads of creative fun redesigning the gods, and there are all these weird logics at play, so there was always balancing. The gods sort of came in male-female pairs, but I was also balancing a sort of internationalism to them, so they weren't all Indian, but also robotics and human and stuff like that. And it kind of made sense to me. So, for example, Vishnu here is a god of preservation, so that means he's the god who comes to Earth and takes different forms to balance Dharma in the world. So that to me said transformation. So there he is transforming, and that meant metallic, and his partner was goddess of love, so she was very human, and it made sense at the time. It still makes sense to me. And then destruction, so there's Shiva again, and his partner Durga, who also takes the form of Kali, and Parvati Durga. So it made sense that she was robotic and in balance. He was like the god of meditation and spiritual enlightenment, but he would also be the one that would lose his temper and destroy the universe. So it kind of made sense that he was human or organic at least. And then, as part of this talk, I've kind of just got a few tangents to sort of say that, like when I was a young freelance artist, it wasn't just doing my own work, it was saying yes to every job that came in. So I got involved in mask theatre and directed a couple of shows because it was offered to me, but then also that led to theatre work and design, but then also logos, which led to logo design. So it was just saying yes to everything to pay bills, basically. But it always felt like each job sort of was useful and skilled me up. So these are 3 really old logos on the top and 3 much newer ones on the bottom, and that led to various design commissions and things like that. But yeah, so back in those days, the focus was still very much the Hindu work, and I had this idea. I wanted to develop the Hindu work into an exhibition, and I had this idea of like a futuristic Hindu temple was the basic concept. So I got some, I think this was my second Arts Council fund to research and develop the idea. So with all of my projects with the Arts Council, it's developing your work and working with new technology. You got to make sure there's an exhibition in there for public engagement, and I always run workshops. So that was at what was then the Corner House. And then I also got my first, I didn't mention, when I was doing the digital work at university, I got a graphics tablet, which meant you draw on a pen, on a pressure-sensitive pen, on a pad. So you had a bit of a hand-eye thing going on, but it was better than a mouse. And then the step up from that was kind of what I've got here, which is a draw-on-screen tablet, which just makes it even better. And the graphics tablet I got back then, I still use every day. But the main idea was sculpture. I sort of saw this exhibition as being an exhibition of Hindu sculptures, futuristic ones. So I started with the only thing I knew, which was clay. I didn't have any experience of sculpture because the university degree, you had to specialise, and I chose painting, but I was always interested in sculpture. Didn't really know what I was doing, but kind of worked out that you needed wooden armatures, especially with Hindu gods with their limbs going off in all directions, and that's my first attempt at a sculptural version of the Shiva Nataraja picture from before. And this one was a nightmare, limbs all in different directions, and he was really heavy, and he fell a few times and smashed. But the important thing from that was discovering that there was a digital version of sculpture. So a few years later, I went for the next Arts Council proposal to actually make the exhibition, and I discovered this process of 3D modelling. This was back in 2006-07 probably. So within this program that I'll be demoing later, you can make your 3D models, and what I loved about it, similar to the painting work, was that level of control, so you could zoom in and you could literally sculpt in negative space and get inside the sculpture. But then importantly, for this project was that you could actually essentially 3D print it. It was called rapid prototyping in those days. And it was a thing that was made. I hadn't heard of it mainly because it was used in industry for like car parts and like for prototyping stuff. So it was unusual for me to be in there as an artist, but I managed to raise the. It was a very expensive process as well, but managed to raise the funds to work with the technology. And that's it. After the supports have been removed, and it's all been smoothed out, and there is that sculpture finished. And then another sculpture from that exhibition, which is the Shiva Lingam, which is an iconic Hindu sculpture, but it was my version of. It's sort of like the male and female sex in unison, which I translated as robotic copulation. But finally, I found a process that I was happy with sculpturally to finally realise the Shiva Nataraja from before. And I spent weeks or months designing that, but I was kind of learning how to sculpt while I was doing it, but it'd probably be a lot quicker now. I think the original idea for that exhibition was all sculptures, but then I realised I couldn't afford that with the funds I had. But actually, it turned out that the obstacle sort of led the path to a better idea. So within the same programme, you could make these 3D animations. So I think 5 of the gods I represented as these animations that I put on screens that were housed in these black monoliths that were inspired by 2001: A Space Odyssey. I was sort of just taking all the things that I was into and regurgitating it. So yeah, there was a series of animations as well. And then there was a central piece, which was another iconic Hindu image, Durga and her family, and that was a Photoshop painting, and at the time it was my most detailed digital painting, but we're fast past that now. And then so that exhibition went on tour, and it went to Leamington Spa, and that was a nice thing in that they wanted to commission a new piece so that it was unique when it got there. So I knew immediately what I wanted to do, and it was to make a 3D version of the digital painting, which didn't quite fit in with all the other 3D stuff. Yeah, not totally happy with that one. Needed more work. But and then a shot from one of that was the exhibition at Durham, one of the spaces there. Okay, and then jump in somewhere completely different. It's sort of concurrent to all of that work. I was invited to sort of paint on canvases at street art festivals and things like that. And this was one of the first times I actually worked with aerosol. So normally I was just a painter with a paintbrush, but all my peers were graffiti artists, and I finally kind of got into it. And it was mainly just a speed thing that really first got me into it, because they were the graffiti artists. They were working on much bigger canvases, and they'd be finished in a fraction of the time. But it slowly sort of bled into my own work. I was in Cambodia. Took some time out before I got the decision from the Ananta project, and I'd run out of money after a month, which was supposed to last 3 months. And I was in a bar where tourists could just sort of scribble their names on the walls and stuff. And I showed them my sketchbook. They gave me a wall. I did a painting on it, and they loved it, and they said, right, we're going to employ you to paint the whole bar and the upstairs that was being renovated, and I painted the ceilings, and it was a great random month. And that's, you can see how small I am. So I was painting like all different layers, so when you walk through the space, the mural kind of changed. I don't have as a good photos of that as I'd like, but anyway. And so this is much more recent, but just to show like that work led to various sort of graffiti mural commissions and stuff over the years. Yeah, and I think I didn't see myself as a graffiti artist. I still don't really, but I've always been interested in graffiti letters and typography and calligraphy. I think my mum let me write my name in graffiti style when I was like 11 on my bedroom wall. So it's always been there, but I didn't really feel like I was a graffiti artist. But around this time when I was working with it a lot more, I kind of wanted a graffiti name. I think that was an important part of being a graffiti artist, is that whole process of having a graffiti name and just writing it over and over and over and over again in different styles, which I kind of wanted to get into. The KrikSix name that I sort of use as an artistic pseudonym, but it's also the name, confusingly, of the character of the horns. It didn't feel relevant to like write KrikSix on a wall. So I was looking for a name, and I had a penny drop moment because it had to have my favourite letters in it, and it was a play on the word cursed, C-U-R-S-E-D, but misspelled. I think that's another graffiti thing, is misspelling words in a slightly cool way. But I just love the letters K-E-R-S-T, but also the word cursed sort of tied into the angsty themes of my work. But then also I had this idea that I could like tag rubbish, and I could work legally, so I could be doing graffiti illegally but next to a policeman because it was just on rubbish. But I did a few of those, and it felt like too one-dimensional idea. I got kind of bored of it, and then I thought, well, what if you take aerosol out of the equation? So then I started to do these cursed graffiti tags from things that were cursed to be destroyed or dispersed or decay. So obviously making a cursed out of leaves, I recorded the process of me making it, but also it eventually drying and dispersing with the wind and rain and stuff. And then, so this was a residency in Carnforth in Cumbria, and got permission from a primary school, got a load of Lego, made a curse out of Lego, and then overnight I had little torches on my fingers. And then when the kids came in the morning, they were encouraged to sort of take it apart and make their own thing. So they did that until there was nothing left. And then the curse car that you saw at the beginning, that was from a scrapyard. So yeah, I'll talk about it a bit later, but I've always been interested in sort of taking away the value of art. So that got crushed at the end, and yeah, and then accursed nibbles for the opening. And then the best idea I've not done, and I don't think I'll ever do, but it was that embodies the idea of the curse, and the idea is that by making it, you make it destined to be destroyed. And I wanted to do a cursed cocaine with like 5 grams of cocaine and like a big mirror and a swanky flat with like trendy 30-somethings, and by making it, it would be destroyed, but it didn't happen. Probably a good thing. And then so the cursed car led to another tangential project, Buzzbeak, an engine. The project was called Engine Tuning in Shetland, and I think someone had seen Curse Car, and the project in Shetland was all about theatre, but with cars as actors and stuff. And they wanted to commission a piece that was, the brief was made from a car, interactive and musical. So I think what they were imagining was they would pair me with like a steel drum musician maker, and that I would make something like Curse Car. And I wasn't really I didn't really want to repeat the idea, and it didn't quite make sense for that. So they gave me some development time, and I had this idea of, well, what if you get a car and you transform it into a sonically, digitally interactive bird. I went into I can't remember if I'm really into Transformers, in case I haven't mentioned that. I went into the pitch with my first ever Transformer, which was like a tape player that would transform into a robot, and out of his chest, the cassette would come out, and that transformed into a condor. So I thought there was a musical link there, and the idea was to make a Land Rover Discovery into a condor. And what happened was we had two Land Rovers. One we transformed into this bird, and then the second one towed the other one. But also in that one, during the live shows, I would be me and an electronica musician would be hidden in the second one. I'd be controlling the bird. It was all fully automated, and the audience could play music to her, or give it an MP3, or play vinyl. We had the whole thing, or just sing into a mic, and then it would appear that the condor was sort of absorbing the music and then playing it back as like alien music. And yeah, so I'll play a little video. So we decided that we needed an actor to sort of help the audience interact with the things. It might not make sense otherwise. So I sort of wrote a part for an actor where she was like a facsimile construct, like a hollow matter version of the condor, and she would sort of work with the audience and get the music from them. I had this whole story about like how they were an alien race and they'd lost their soul or their spark, and they'd come to Earth to. I ripped off Starman and Transformers a lot.
We are the condor. We are Buzzbank. 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 You can share our files with us. Any words by rhythm or noise. You can say.
I'm racing, slowly sinking, wasting, crumbling like pastries, and they scream. The worst things in life come free to us.
yeah, I forgot to say we were going to do a final show where we showed the transformation by projecting that animation onto the screen where the condor was hidden behind, but that didn't happen. But it leads on to another tangent. So by getting into the 3D animation work that you've seen of the Ananda stuff and then Buzzbeak, I kind of got into video mapping projects. So that's like projecting onto large buildings and kind of making it look like the building was doing things. So this was a project in Finland, and it was a big collaborative project that I ended up directing, and there was puppeteers and dancers, and we had this huge building, and it was over a massive river, so we had these huge projectors on the other side of the river projected across. I'm just going to show you a little bit that I made. I made some content for it as well, and I transformed the building into a baby angel god demon robot thing. Right, and then the next project, jumping around again. So I had an exhibition at Z Arts in Hume in Manchester, and it's this huge, brilliant gallery space, and another Arts Council funded project, and I got my first 3D printer at home, so it was the first time that technology had started to become affordable. So I had this sort of challenge of like having something that could make things that were a few centimetres tall and this huge exhibition space to fill. So I had this idea for like basically combining all the different art forms. So this has actually got, it was designed in Blender in 3D, and it was 3D printed, and there's photographs. And the whole series, there was a series of these works that sort of combined lots of different art forms, and they were essentially just printed onto really a generic, valueless kind of printed canvas kind of thing. Yeah, so each of those images contain like the pencil sketch, a digital sketch, the 3D model, a 2D render of the 3D model, the 3D print, photograph of the 3D print, and more digital painting. And I think I was sort of maybe a little bit frustrated about the valuelessness of digital artwork. I mean, you can sell prints and you can say, well, I'm only doing a few, therefore it's worth a bit more. But essentially, however much work I put into it, the thing on the screen was not really worth anything. And I don't know if it was frustration, but I kind of enjoyed playing with that anyway as well. So there was a series of those kind of works, but then also it was a big space, so I kind of wanted a few pieces of each of the different art forms. So this was a huge canvas. That's a straight 3D render as a print. There are little 3D prints in the space. And then mixing 3D print with paint, and then this was mixing a bit of everything and mirrors and just having fun with it really. And then part of that project also was getting hold of motion capture equipment for the first time. So this was back in 2015, and it was that kind of like CGI Gollum type stuff, but it was becoming affordable. You didn't need a £1 million animation studio, but it was very limited. So I think with this, I had like the first iteration was I had 6 PlayStation Eye cameras all dotted around the room, and it would sort of try and work out what your T-pose was, and then you would move and it would work it out. And then I worked with 2 Kinects, which worked better after all of that effort. But anyway, it was great to be experimenting with that, but it wasn't really usable. It was just a bit too clunky. But then the face animation stuff was a lot more successful. I'm going to show you a little video. And the company that made that ended up getting bought out by Apple, and they were called Face Shift, and there's sort of the technology on iPhones where it can mimic your facial movements and make it as a character. That was them. And so that came off the market, so that was the end of that. but yeah, kind of very. So I wasn't sure if I'd share it, but very clunky animation stuff. So yeah, part of what I do, it's often collaborating with musicians and performers. So this project had SPYE the rapper and Ben Mellor, a poet, Léonie a singer, Benji Reid, choreographer, dancer, and Gadema, a rapper producer. So it's kind of a rough video, but yeah.
You know what, I'm no robot. If I'm out function, so what? I raise my data with the lazy laser. Rewire my desire for the great creator. They can't reprogram the demon host with the hand of no man, not even close. Not even if they give it the most. I'm a mechanical animal with a digital ghost. Which human loser gave me AI, super duper computer? Booster, don't get the episode, that's a stupid maneuver. I go by the water people like a developer. Head of a nitro, micro, with a maestro, metro, and a pro. Incredible Peugeot, great slow tempo was a better incredible tool.
Nodes cause errors in my script when that captivating implodes in my visual cortex. I register how her skin glows. My plasma heart burns hard and bright like it might implode. Searching for reasons, but the data on the disk shows no corruption, no information to be disclosed. Between organic and the digital, manic individual, don't panic in the visible. Lazy as it's physical, respect is in the ridicule. My foes are feeling minuscule, it's lonely at the pinnacle. The team was a mate to the set to guard an Autobots. Whatever the weather, slaughter lots, a square peg in your polka dots. What's the pickle, my pickles? I tear a hole in your thoughts and stick KrikSix in your riddles.
Okay, I think I'm a bit behind, so I'm going to speed up a little bit now. Then this is a little project. I got invited to go to residency in Sri Lanka, and it was pretty nice. Just being invited to experiment and play with different ideas. And I kind of figured if I was being put on a beach in Sri Lanka that I would play with sand, and went back to my roots and did clay sculpture and just played with different ideas, which was nice. So there's photography mixed with clay sculptures and putting them in the ground and playing with the images. And I forgot to mention, so with that that last project at Z Arts, the themes of it were kind of mixing the religious stuff with the cartoony things. I was sort of seeing a parallel between some religious concepts of like enlightenment and chosen ones with sort of superhero movies and like moments where you discover your powers and stuff like that. So that I was sort of playing with the sort of the superhero archetype, and then with this project it was making it even simpler and just like head and hand emerging from a thing. So I was slowly moving away from complex figurative ideas, and this was one of my first times I had an idea for a picture that wasn't figurative at all. So I wouldn't call it abstract, it's sort of a weird floating building, but I was starting to get interested in non-figurative ideas. And then when back in the UK, my first introduction to virtual reality back in, I think, 2016 or 17, and really near here, the BBC Blue Room is a part of the BBC where they play with new technology, and they were looking for an artist who worked with sculpture and graffiti and digital stuff, and my name came up a few times. So it was a nice phase where I would sort of pop into, and this was before virtual reality was, you could buy it in a shop, so it was sort of early access stuff. So I was going into the studio and just playing with this new technology, and it's sort of kind of what I do with the 3D modelling, but in actual 3D space, which was a bit of a game changer, and I loved it. and this was a program called Google Tilt Brush. So it's kind of like painting, but in 3D space. And I think an analogy that someone used was it's like painting with ribbons. So it's not three-dimensional objects, but it's a three-dimensional shape with a flat plane attached to it. So it was sort of an early iteration of sort of VR sculpting. And then later that year, and when it got released, I got hold of my own VR setup. And then there was this new program called Masterpiece VR, and it was a lot more sculptural. So it was a bit like actually sculpting with digital clay, and you could really take away and add as you would with clay. And what was great about it was its real 3D movement, like in out, and your movements are actually controlling the tool, which you're sort of mimicking on a 2D surface. And when I first started to use it, I thought that was it, that I would always be using, VR for the rest of my work. But it does some things very well, but it's not as powerful as a desktop computer. So I found myself hitting brick walls often. It's good for some things, but I default to sculpting on a normal computer in a 3D program, just because you can do a lot more and have more control. Right, and then another left turn. This was a project. I had this idea, I think at the beginning of 2016. I'd seen a few exhibitions with 3D printed work in them, but everything I was seeing was very much a mishmash of whatever you could do. So little green boats and funny little 3D printed pigs. But I hadn't really seen an exhibition that was sort of work made in a sort of a fine art gallery with that kind of environment in mind. So I had this idea for an exhibition of British sculptors working with digital mediums. That was the idea. And again, it was an Arts Council project. And the first artist I found, who I was well aware of before, was Keith Brown, who's a Manchester artist, and he's a bit of a legend in terms of digital artwork. I think he's probably using 3D print before 5-10 years before I'd even heard about it, and he helped identify some of the other artists as well. So he was a really important part of that exhibition. So it was a funny project in that I'd set it all up. With Arts Council funding, you have to sort of raise at least 20%. So I'd managed to do that. I'd got 2 venues. I'd got all the artists lined up, and I got one of my no's, which was sort of really heartbreaking at the time. But everything was set up. So I rewrote the proposal and sent it back within like a week and a half. And I think it's my most aggressive Arts Council proposal. I basically said, look, everything's set up. I've got the insurance and the transport covered, and we've got the artists. But if you put in half, then we can at least commission each of the artists to make something new, so it's not just existing artwork. And they said yes. And with all my Arts Council projects, I end up at the end of my overdraft and completely bankrupt at the end of it. And this was especially the case with this one. But then, so this was one of the commissioned pieces, and by a brilliant artist called Annie Cattrell. When that turned up, I was like, it's all worthwhile. I was going a bit mad otherwise, but beautiful work. And she did a series of 3 of these pieces, and her work is all about like brain scans and body scans. And I think this was a part of her brain that was scanned, and she was making herself feel pleasure and pain, and it was like that part of her body in different states, and then cast in this resin. So yeah, it was a really great exhibition, but I was just burnt out, and it should have toured, but when it was done, I was done. But another great thing that came out of it was meeting John Isherwood, another artist that Keith had put me in touch with to consider for the exhibition, and he was up for it. And he works predominantly in stone and marble. And what was really nice about his work, which was a bit of an eye-opener, was with everyone else's work, you can see it's all delicate 3D printed work and behind cages and display cabinets. He actively wanted people to touch it because it's stone, and he would encourage it, and it would survive. So that was interesting for me. But he runs this project called the Digital Stone Project in Italy. And we remotely became friends, and he invited me to apply for that. So I had another Arts Council fund to get there. And so this is a project where you work with a 7-axis robot arm that mills a big block of marble, and you send in your designs. So some artists would send a digital file that they'd worked on, or some people would make a sculpture and scan it and have that milled. So different approaches. So I kind of wanted to come in with as complex a thing as I could. And one of the things I think they came back and said it's too complex. Not that they couldn't do it, but part of the project is you get X amount of hours with the robot arm. So I kind of did a few iterations and eventually came back with something that was complex enough but doable within the time frame. So that's the software works out the milling, how it's going to mill it, and that's it being milled. And that is it after it's come out, and I think there's a bit of work on that. And that's it, completely finished. And so this was a very lucky thing. I got there, and mine was the only one that was broken, and everyone was really apologetic. And I was mostly excited because I was like, well, can I keep the broken one? And they was like, oh, yeah, completely, because it's sort of useless stone to them now. And that was good for a couple of reasons. The first being that I got funding from the Arts Council to have a show in England, and I was going to show the marble work, but the Digital Stone Project involves a group exhibition with 20-odd international artists and a group show at the end in Italy. So obviously I was like torn between, I would only have one sculpture and I'd have to choose which one I would show at. Benefits to both, and this meant I could have one in each, but it also meant I had this idea for because all these processes are digital. The idea was you can make things with different processes and put them all together. And I had thought with year one of Digital Stone Projects, I knew immediately I wanted to go back every year I could. I should just work with stone and just get into the stone and not complicate things. But because I had this second opportunity, I pushed that forward, and so I scanned the broken sculpture, and designed these 3D printed parts. And then a company that I work with in Manchester, Dicey Tech, they printed these pieces out and sent them over to me, and then I sort of stuck them on and went crazy with this. I figured I could go crazy with it. So there's graffiti, there's aerosols in there, and there's ink, and like you can see the little X, and I've painted a drip that goes onto the plinth. So I just had a lot of fun with that one, and that was that. And then part of the same project, I wanted, this isn't my work, this is a stock sort of 3D print from this printer, the Stratasys J750, which I've been aware of for a few years, and it takes years for me sometimes to get the funding raised to do these projects. But finally, this was part of that project. And what this printer does, as you can kind of see, is it can print 6 different materials simultaneously. And one of those can be, or a few of them can be transparent, and you can mix all the different materials to make, loads of different variations of colours. So I was chomping at the bit to work with that technology. And again, similar to the marble, I was like, I wanted to work with the full build area of the 3D printer and to create a really complex thing. And they came back to me and said, you can't afford that. I can afford something about that big with my budget. But also, it was too complex. But also, my file wasn't watertight. With this process, because you've got lots of different forms all overlapping and going in and out of each other, it all has to be perfect. So I simplified and kind of upped my skill set as well. And I should probably mention the move from figurative to abstract work around this time. This was the first time that I felt I jumped into it. And I just kind of felt, I think I was quite inspired by Keith's work and John Isherwood's. But this idea that, on the one hand, if you wanted to push technology, if you were limited by a kind of a figurative idea, that was a limit. That was as far as you could go with it. But with the abstracts, if you remember Keith's piece, you could really just you could be designing to push the technology. But then while I got into it, I felt like this work also sort of had a lot of me, all the other stuff that I was interested in. I think there's the graffiti in there, there's the Hindu Indian stuff, I think there's a lot of the personal human stuff in there for me. So it just felt like a nice way of working. So this was the digital render of that piece, and that is it 3D printed. I think it's my favourite piece, but it's only tiny and it cost a lot to get that. So, not a technology I can work with whenever I want, which is, I guess, the only limitation of high-end technology. And then the next year's project, so yes, I knew that I wanted to go back to Digital Stone Project, and was lucky to get another yes from the Arts Council. At this time, I wanted to work with 2 blocks of marble and the more advanced 3D print process that I'd worked with the standalone sculpture and put them all together. A thing about the Digital Stone Project is the best bit is when you first get there. So 20-odd artists from all around the world have sent their files, but you're not shown the milled work until you get there. So the best bit is when you all go down to the marble floor and everyone sees their milled marble for the first time. And the thing that I think no one expects, unless they've been there before, is those beautiful mill lines, the contours. And I think a lot of the time you would think, oh, I definitely want to keep those in because they're so beautiful. But 9 times out of 10 you wouldn't, because it wasn't the intention of the piece, kind of thing. So this year I was like, I really wanted to work and design with creating those mill lines in mind, so they were purposeful. So I asked them not this time to purposefully not mill mine until I got there, so I could sit with the engineer and actually kind of be involved in those decisions of the tool sizes and which angles, and so I was sort of controlling those mill lines, which I've got more into. So that's both the white and the black piece being milled, and then so when I left the previous year, the first question, which I didn't think of while I was there, was can you export the milling simulations as a 3D file? And that's the easiest thing they could do. So he sent me last year's one straight away, and that means all those mill lines exist as a digital. The simulation is like 95% accurate. So this time, instead of scanning the marble, I had these digital files to work from, design these complex multi-material 3D printed parts, and you can just about see like there's sort of the mill lines that are actually from the stone digitally. And then the hope was that it would all fit together, and it did. And I sometimes think I'm the only one that gets excited by the fact that worked, and that that 3D printed parts can fit onto mill lines, but I do. So, and then part of this, again, is the dissemination in England. If you want Arts Council of England funding, so it was shown in Italy, but also brought it back to Light Up Lancaster, and there was this idea of projection mapping onto the sculpture. So I'd sort of designed these very basic animations, but kind of playing with echoing those mill lines and that kind of thing. And then another thing is augmented reality. So you might have seen with some phone apps that you can look at something and it will come to life on your phone. So I've been quite interested in making sculptures that come alive. So one day I think we'll be wearing AR glasses, but for now it's like looking at a thing on your phone and it coming to life. So this was in collaboration with an AR company. I used to work with them as Inspiro, and they got absorbed by Discovery Education's immersive content wing, and they've been great in collaborating with me on, it's all clever programming stuff that I have no idea how to do, but being able to see the sculpture and know that it's there and then overlay animations over it. So the idea is that I've been building up to for years, and then lockdown has taken a few years out of it, and I feel like I'm going backwards, but an exhibition of sculptures that exist in AR that come to life. So this is, imagining a space, and this is me testing AR, because now I can do some basic things on my phone, but imagining making an exhibition space where it's totally immersive if you were wearing glasses and smoke and liquids coming out at you and stuff. And then I plonked the Buzzbeak animation on my road. Must have looked a bit weird, just sort of like looking at nothing on my phone, but it's not fast. Yeah, so that's what I want to make one day, but I don't know. It feels further away than it ever was. Right, and I'm also going to mention Claudia Dietz's work. So this was an artist I met on the Digital Stone project. She's from Germany, Stuttgart in Germany. And just an amazing artist that I connected with, and she has like the skill set of her stonework is just on another level. Like she can make a cuboid into a sphere in a fraction of the time it would take anyone else. When I went to visit her and get sort of learn some of the techniques for hand stone work, and realise that some of her jobs to pay bills is doing lettering, this really precise, perfect kind of work, and then her own work is these beautiful organic. They look, when you see them in the flesh, it's kind of like they're alive, and she plays with painting them, which I'm also into. I went to, after the second Digital Stone project, a few of us went to her studio in Stuttgart, near Stuttgart, and I always figure a reason to use a digital process should never be because you can't do it the other way. So I always like to learn. So this was the other way around this time. So it was starting digital and then going back to hand carving. I was only there for a few days, but it was a brilliant process to learn a very old school technique. Need to speed up. Okay, so I'll briefly talk about, this was a project that Ben Reid from Wild in Art, he used to run Spearfish and Eurocultured, where all that the graffiti festival things were from. And he had this idea, this was when we were we were still in lockdown, but you couldn't go to galleries, so he had this idea of the 50 Windows project. So it was windows all across Manchester. Some of you may have seen it, and putting artists in different windows. So it meant you could go for your walk but see some art. So I got the big spot at the Royal Northern College of Music, and it was a small fund, but so it was bringing some existing work, but also playing with a couple of new ideas. So I've gotten quite interested in this idea of plinths, and it was kind of like working to a budget. I could make a plinth for very little, an MDF plinth, and then actually making the art around it with these very small 3D printed parts. So those two white pieces were new for that. Then it snowed, and I lugged it into the middle of my local park to get some pictures. Oh no, maybe that is supposed to be there. Okay, another tangent. So during lockdown, I got really into. I used to go to life drawing every now and then, but my friend who runs a class in Manchester was one of the first to put it online as a Zoom thing. So I got really into it as a lockdown kind of activity, and then have since been going back to life drawing. And I just want to keep showing that it's all about jumping around and doing as many different things as you can. So these are some more recent life drawings. And then also during lockdown, just kind of going, right, I'm going to do some mad abstract expressionist paintings as well. So tangent. So then going back to the plinth idea, which has been mainly what I've been working on for the last year or so. And just again, it's been about simplifying the idea and simplifying it, and I've got the 3D printer so I can test out ideas, and it's just big. What I really want to do is even simplify it even more than these, to be honest, and just have these very basic plinths that are distorted. So I went back to Italy for this year's Digital Stone project, and that's a recent piece being milled, and that's it being finished. And you can see again, it's like keeping those mill lines in, and I've actually worked out a way so when I'm designing it I can mimic the mill lines as I go along, so that's been another step up. I feel like that's the hour, but I'm just gonna zip through the last things in like a couple of minutes. So I've now got the newer version of the motion capture. So this is me in my house, and I'm wearing a motion capture suit, gloves, and I've got a camera on my face, so this means in real time I can now there's my great acting abilities, and that's the camera attached to my body. I can now in real time, it's real Gollum stuff, and it actually works, and it's quite fluid. There's me looking like an idiot. And then so part of this project is I've got various collaborators lined up. So this time this is Mouse. He's a 2x B-Boy world champion. So this is about like pushing the technology as far as it can go. It's a bit glitchy, but this was like, we had an hour together. And it's just amazing compared to, what I was working with five years ago or whatever. I've also got a ballet dancer, Georgina Cartwright, lined up, and then two MCs from Manchester, Chunky and Strategy, who are amazing. To do sort of perform. They're going to write some pieces and perform wearing the suit, so it will be their facial reactions and movements and their hands and fingers and so on. This was very recent. It's like I think it's an 8-second clip. There's me, and I'm sculpting in VR, but I'm wearing the motion capture suit, so you can see the 3D character is weirdly kind of in VR. So it's a bit meta. The original concept was, and it kind of works, but it didn't work live because there was too much of a lag with the projectors, but that you could actually be wearing the suit and you could be designing the character while you were animating it, which was pleasingly double meta. But and I felt like I couldn't do this talk without mentioning AI, because that's like the new thing at the moment. So if you're not familiar with AI, it's just taken off AI generated artwork. So you can type in some words and it will do a digital painting that like something better than I would take a year, and I couldn't paint something with that level of complexity. It's really upsetting, isn't it? It's quite upsetting. I think it's great, but it's only upsetting when artists don't mention it's AI and say, I've done a new digital painting, and you're like, no, you haven't. But you can't be bitter about these things. But so I started to experiment with. This is a video I'll just show you. This was a video I found online. A friend introduced me to Lico's choreography, and I loved it. I have asked her for permission or if she wants to collaborate. Well, I heard back from her. But so this was a few years ago, and I was like, what can I do with these videos? And I started to add these trails and didn't get anywhere with it. But then with the AI, I was like, oh, that video with the trails. And then so what I would have done with this is just the prompts I would have used would have been like abstract, neon, robot. But essentially with AI, you could do, human giraffe, and it would make that person into that. So there's a lot of potential. I'm very clear on what I think is acceptable, what's cheating and what's lying, and tracing is cheating, but sometimes it's not. And now there's a whole can of worms has been opened up, really. But
It's not cheating, it's still art.
It's still art, yeah. Yeah, I saw someone. I have a thing about tracing. Just feels like the biggest shortcut you can take. But then I saw an artist just say, whatever it takes for you to get into it, just do it and enjoy it. And I felt bad for being so strict. Yeah, this is the last video that I was going to show if I was ahead of time, but
You can watch it and then we could just see if people have any questions.
should we do it that way around, or questions and there? Because I'm also supposed to do a demo, and I realised we started 15 minutes late, so I'm not sure what order.
Well, let's see if there's any questions.
Yeah.
Do you have one or two questions?
Do you want to?
Get it on, yeah.
Yeah, right, okay.
very simple thing to put in space because the potato has a very simple rhythm, a 24-hour rhythm. It doesn't have a complicated life pattern. If the potato cannot survive out of the Earth's sphere of influence, then I would be very, very cautious if I were concerned with the total problem of sending man out into outer space until I had found out what it was that the potato lacked in order to permit it to survive out there.
Hello.
Really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing.
Thank you. I love it. I want to go every year if I can afford it. So.
So I'm sorry, I just saw that.
Oh, thank you. No, it's the thing. So.
Yeah, it is. So has anyone got any questions? No pressure, because I'm usually with us, so we'll just have a...
I've got a question. So we do a lot of that part, that digital development about pre-planning it. Have you ever tried doing a similar thing but by hand?
You mean with the marble sculpture?
Yeah. Especially that layer effect.
Yeah. So that was a funny thing. So when I was with Claudia in Stuttgart, and we'd had a few drinks, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm doing stuff that you couldn't do by hand," and like that was and she went, "You could do that by hand," so you can make anything if you're skilled enough, you could make that digital effect. It's a bit like, you could do a really complex digital painting on a canvas if you had enough time, and yeah, it kind of felt like the stone piece that I made at Claudia's kind of felt like it was a little bit in that direction, but I think I'm a long way off having the ability to do that mill line effect. I don't know, but I'm not sure that was a very good answer. Yeah.
It's so inspiring. I'm looking forward to your exhibition, Higgins.
Yes, so we know each other through IOU in Halifax, and so
nice.
it's
a good fit.
Yeah. So the exhibition there, it's like quite a public. It's not an individuated space, so that sort of determined that it was suitable for the stonework. My project's just crumbled in lots of ways, not only to do with my mum, but there was supposed to be an exhibition in Hull, and the guy that was Barney from Doodlebug, who was supposed to be supporting that, the building he's in, they've been kicked out of, and it's going to be torn down, literally. So I don't know how much capacity he's going to have for helping me curate an exhibition, and we've had problems with the workshops and bringing Claudia over. Every element of it is. But every other Arts Council proposal, it's been, now I realise how weird it is that it all went exactly to plan. And this one, everything's gone wrong. So it's kind of like, well, that's fine. If that's a part of the process, that X, Y, and Z has happened and you have to do something different and adapt to it, then that's legitimate, isn't it? So the main thing I'm doing is just giving myself extend. I always extend it by a month or so because I always need to. But now it's like, you give me the money, let me extend it for like a year or a year and a half, and do it as well as I can, but with more time and more breathing space. And because it's insane what I always promise that I'll do with it, and I'll do this and this and this just to try and get the money confirmed. Yeah, isn't it? And then
And then we do more.
Yeah, it's a sort of a masochism, isn't it? But,
Totally. Anything else? What about you guys in your art? Are there any sort of synergies or connections or questions around technology, programs?
I was kind of interested in the 3D printing where it's different materials.
Yeah.
What sort of materials do they contemplate? How does that vary?
Yeah, so that's evolving as well. So now I've got money to work with a new version of the printer, which is now 7 materials, and I only just found out really recently that one of those materials can now be bendy. So it keeps changing. Like each chamber can have like a different material. So And I think it's stuff that I don't understand. It's like chemical compounds and resins and things like that, but constantly evolving. So what's great about the new one is the clear is really clear now, so it kind of looks like glass, which has a lot of capabilities. So I don't know what I keep jumping back to. My final fade out slide is like, I see myself as an abstract sculptor now, but I keep coming back to I really love doing figurative stuff, and it's also this idea that people understand figurative stuff and connect with it in a different way. And with the next sculpture on the 3D printed thing, I kind of want to, because that last one with the white and the black and the pinks and all of that, I think I love it, but I think a lot of people wouldn't get it and wouldn't get off what I'm trying to show off with the technology. Whereas if it was a figurative idea, maybe they would. So I'm not sure.
I don't think we ever box ourselves.
No.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's them saying we should do that.
Yeah.
I suppose, I mean, work is so multi-dimensional. It's amazing in terms. So where do you see yourself? Do you see yourself playing with augmented reality or kind of printing? You know, where do you see yourself going? Kind of.
I think it's that digital realm of like, you know, if you could make an exhibition where it comes to life when you're looking at it in a different way, I think that's really and that's why it's funny how it all fits together, because what's great about the stone is you can touch it, so that makes you be able to have a target that you can actually go up to and touch, and then stuff happens, you know. So yeah, I think it's all of the above really, and I remember about 7 years ago I was kind of like felt like things had come to I was kind of bored. I didn't know what was, and then VR came out and 3D print became accessible, and you know, and now there's AI. It feels like maybe there's something new that we don't even know about.
They're printing food. You could go back to the food.
Printing food, yeah. Curse nibbles too, yeah.
Bring the creation and destruction back in.
Yeah.
And we get to eat steak.
3D printing stages now.
Stages.
Yeah, the cement, everyone.
Yeah, they do houses and buildings now, don't they? And
In London, I think it's Warner Brothers that are playing with the idea of 3D stages. Everything's completely printed. Huge rooms with a massive machine that just go around printing all the props and everything.
Wow.
That's an active quality.
But then you skip that whole step if you've got goggles.
Yeah.
I know that's the thing, isn't it? You want it tangible as well. Yeah.
I am supposed to do a demo as well, aren't I?
What's our time in life?
Okay, maybe I won't do a full one, because I'll do like how about I do like
We've probably got 5 minutes.
a 5-minute thing, just because I do want to sort of show off. So one of the
Sorry, before you have you got these demos like on like a public space that we can look at, like video or
the slides, the what? Sorry.
the previous demo that we just watched? Have you got that on a public space?
Oh, you mean the last video on the? Yes. So all my stuff is under the name KrikSix. So there's a YouTube channel that's got all of the videos. So there's all the there's free marble videos, and there's 3D modelling stuff, and there's time lapses of the 3D print. So it's all there, yeah. And I might put this up as well with all the things. So I wasn't sure what I would do for the demo. I was still not sure this morning. And like normally when I do live 3D stuff, I get the VR out because it's kind of newer to people and it's quite performative and stuff. So I was really unsure, but I'm not normally doing like a 1 hour talk before it. And then I remember the word masterclass, and then I was like, well, actually, what would be better is not using like expensive equipment. And actually, this program, Blender, is free and it works on really basic computers. And you know, I thought that's probably more relevant. Actually, is just. So what I was gonna do, you know, if I had more time, I would do a more complex version of what I'm doing now. So this is Blender, a 3D program that I use for pretty much. Oh, I've not got all my settings.
So was it Blender we were watching just before?
Yes. So,
Wow.
well, with the marble. So the sculpting phase was Blender,
Yeah.
and then when it goes into the milling simulations, that's
they've got pieces of
Clever,
software.
yeah, that's clever milling
That's
software.
Like,
that's
that's magic, isn't it?
yeah, that's actually just magic. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, isn't that sort of set up somewhere in Britain, or is that just?
I think there is, and do you know what? I've not tried too hard to find out about it because I just want to go to Italy. So I had this idea that what I would do is, if I was making a sculpture in this program, that I was going to make, keeping it meta again, like I was going to make a character sort of making, like sat at a desk. So I'm going to do, the whole point with all of this
already
is.
Looks like you.
Yeah.
I'm telling.
That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. So I'm just, the whole thing is always the more time you spend on it, that's what art is, isn't it? As it's. And it's probably worth mentioning also that how I learnt Blender was from YouTube videos and forums. And if you got stuck, you would ask a question in the forum, and people would help you and stuff like that. So,
with all the different technologies that you've learned to use, are you self-taught with them all?
I would say so. I find that when people say they're a self-taught artist, I went to university. I still see myself as self-taught because no one, no one ever.
Like YouTube videos,
Yeah.
figure it out.
Yeah.
Figure out how to use
Yeah. But I think that's it, isn't it? It's like someone says that's how you do it, and then you have to do it.
I suppose going back all that time
Yeah.
when you first started using, can't remember what.
You
that
started with
program
just
was.
writing the program from, because I remember doing that.
I didn't understand.
You figured that out yourself.
No. The writing the program is me and my sister literally copying.
You copy
Page-
it, and it
not
takes
understanding
hours and
it.
hours and you've not got a clue what you're doing.
No.
But it's amazing though. That's the beginning of it
Yeah.
all, isn't it? That's
Yeah.
like
And that
foundation.
for that to be exciting,
Yeah.
to have a white screen and to move a cursor and then go spacebar and we got a black pixel. It's just proud of being old. I think that's what that is. But which is. So with 3D sculpting, a lot of it is you start. I suppose it's the same with painting as well. You start very simple, and you break things down into. I guess it's similar to painting as well. Like you start with very simple geometric shapes, and slowly build it up.
And so you split it in half so you could mirror it.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. So
Device.
yeah, so that's a great thing about digital things. You have all these tools. So what you can add, so I've added a mirror. So at some point it just makes it easier to map it out, and then you might then get rid of the mirror modifier and then start sculpting individually. But then there's also.
Try this later tonight.
I would say, with Blender, it's free. The software is free, and I would really recommend just if you're into it, just Google YouTube Blender beginner tutorial. And there's famously like how to make a donut in Blender, and it looks, you spend an hour and you've got this beautiful donut with pink icing on it and stuff.
And so then you apply filters then after that?
Yeah, so what I've added now is it's not a good name for it, a subdivision surface modifier, but essentially it smooths your surface.
Yeah.
So again, it's shortcuts, is it? But it's also part of the process of 3D modelling, really.
Have you used other 3D modelling softwares?
Not really, because I think what happens with these things is you get used to the interface of one program, and then it's quite a few steps back to. So when I first had that Ananta project, it was at Lantern House in Cumbria, which used to be the welfare state. But it was linked. The residency was linked to a company called Folly, who don't exist now. Lots don't anymore. But they were really into open source software, the free software thing. So I was trying to decide between Maya and Cinema 4D and all of that stuff, and everyone tells you a different thing. And they said you should try Blender. It's open source, and I just stuck with it. I think it'd be It can do everything. You know, it can do everything that the expensive ones can do. So.
But Blender now have a subscription model, haven't they now?
Have they?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, if you're new to filters, if you're new, you can have basic tools on Blender as it's free software, but then you upgrade, then you have more access to the filters and stuff like that.
Oh, that's not a good move.
Depends how long ago you became a member.
I don't think I've been a member. I've just downloaded it.
Oh, I see.
Because you don't even, because it's free and open source, you don't even need to make an account. So I have no idea what you had to pay.
I had a look at free software and all. I downloaded it and like, oh yeah, you need to pay. You have to have like upgraded access to.
That's really sad
it's not
news.
a lot though. It's quite. It's still like pretty. I'm aware of time.
You get.
Well, we've got to get the hands. Get the
yeah.
hands.
Okay.
Can't not have hands.
Okay. We'll do a
Because
really.
Always a hard bit.
Yeah.
No pressure. He's wearing mittens. It's fine. It's a little sausages.
We'll do little. There we go. So just another setting. So you got all these different faces, and instead of so far I've been pulling one out, and then I've split it into three, and then said instead of pulling them all out in one go, the command was extrude individual faces. There we go. So very. This is not the best hand I've ever sculpted, but that's all right.
We love it.
And then the very last thing that I would do, which I could spend hours on, but is then so at the moment it's this very basic geometry, but if I apply both the mirror and the subdivision, you can see that all becomes real information, and then I could go to sculpt mode. And then I could actually then get into some. Oh, maybe I should put symmetry on. You know, and you could actually just start to sculpt more like clay.
And then you can try that into your 3D printer then.
Yeah.
Fantastic, so exciting, isn't it?
There, so you get the idea.
Yeah, it's lovely.
You know, so if we had half an hour, that would be half an hour's worth better. But it's really just.
Yeah, can you just do like slow TV for me? we'll just tune in every week, just as our sort of.
There's that thing called
It's
Twitch that
down.
I've not gotten into, but I think I would do it, and I'd have like one person watching, and then they'd leave.
No, we don't watch it.
Yeah. Okay. And so on. And so on.
That's wonderful.
And then some dramatic lighting.
So whenever you take something like that into the 3D printer, do you have to go through another formatting stage?
Yeah. But Blender's become really good at that as well. It can clean up your files. It's amazing. So there's now like I don't have it installed for some weird reason. But there's a 3D print dialog, and you can click a button and it says clean up your file, and it's really powerful now. So and then normally if you've got a 3D printer, that will have its own software or whatever. But it's just making the file watertight, which used to be really difficult. But now it's just like press a button and it will clean up. Yeah. So no excuses.
Right, we
Yeah.
have to go because we've been
I think we'll turn into pumpkins if it turns to 8 o'clock. They said something like that.
No crumbs.
They've got lockers in the building. So I'd like to say thank you so much indeed. And round of applause. Thank you. I'm sure you'll all agree that was just fantastic, wasn't it? Really inspiring. So inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
And thanks for having me walk the plank and host.
Make you walk the plank, yeah.
Huh?
We'll make you walk the plank.